and then a European backbone to be ready latest 2030. It's 8 years from now. It's quite soon, and we believe that hydrogen then will be absolutely, in a competitive sense, the replacement agent for oil and gas.
There is no doubt amongst European countries that we need to decarbonize our industry and clean up our energy mix. Where we still do not fully agree is how big of a role hydrogen will play in this effort of decarbonizing the industry and enabling a sustainable circular economy. Because the devil is in the detail here. How do we really quantify and measure if the implementation of a hydrogen industry really helps us in achieving the decarbonization goals? And most importantly, what is the most promising and successful path to also realize its economic potential? These are not easy questions to answer, but time is of the essence here. Hence, several organizations related to the hydrogen industry have jointly published a Green Hydrogen Manifesto, a paper with 12 very specific demands, all of them encouraging lawmakers to seize the opportunity of going down the hydrogen path and, most importantly, to proactively solve the issues and challenges that we still need to overcome in order to go down that path successfully. Some of the initiators between the Green Hydrogen Manifestos are Hydrogen Europe, the German Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association DWV, the European Electrolyzer and Fuel Cell Forum EFCF, and the Smarter E Europe. In this episode today, we'll find out what the reasoning behind the Green Hydrogen Manifesto was and why it is needed right now. Welcome to the Smarter E podcast, a podcast for and with the creators of the new energy world. A world in which energy will be renewable, decentralized and digital, bringing together electricity, heat and mobility. Let us show you how we will get there and who will get us there. I'm very happy about my guest today because not only has he been the Secretary General of Hydrogen Europe since 2016 and is now its CEO, but previously, he's also been a member of the European Parliament and actually was involved in laying the groundwork for the first and second joint undertaking on hydrogen and fuel cells, meaning he knows both sides of the aisle, the lawmaker approach as well as the industry demands, as well as the industry perspective. I'm happy to have him in my call today. Welcome, Jorgo Chatzimarkakis.
Yes, I'm happy to be in that call.
Jorgo, as I mentioned, you sort of switched sides. You went from politics to the industry side, now representing Hydrogen Europe. Are you happy there? Or do you sometimes just for a moment wish to be able to be in legislation again and being able to actually mold the laws that will enable a hydrogen industry in Europe?
I'm very happy because I live my dream. I started already as a very young boy to be interested in hydrogen. I was 16, 17 years when I discovered on a Wühltisch, on a book in front of a library, second, third hand books. And the book that I grabbed was called In the Beginning There Was Hydrogen. Im Anfang da war Wasserstoff, from Heumer von Dittfurt, a German professor and a TV star. And that brought me on my way to hydrogen from very early days on. It accompanied me all over my life, also my political life. I got engaged into politics because of hydrogen. Quite funny. During the Chernobyl year, 86, when everybody was looking for a solution out of nuclear, so not using nuclear. And I found a poster at my university saying, "Stop nuclear, let's turn solar power into hydrogen." That was 86. And I started to go into that party and to be active in politics. And now I quite enthusiastic about implementing all this. It's some 40 years later, but it's fantastic to see how the world is now ready to follow up some, great ideas in decarbonizing our energy system, and hydrogen is the key.
You mentioned it yourself. It's now 40 years later, and the European Union has been acting on this topic for a couple of years already. So why the manifesto now, and why in the form of a manifesto? Is it because of the time pressure in terms of climate change, or what was really the big why behind it?
Well, one of the biggest drivers of policy makers at the moment is indeed the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement was the only successful COP conference of parties to mitigate climate effects that we ever have seen. Paris 2015 set some clear goals for humankind. And now many policy drivers, especially the European Union, who wants to be a front runner here, have the target and have imposed on themselves some new policies in order to get CO2 out of the atmosphere. And that is, so to say, now the time after another big problem. So next to climate, we had now the pandemic. We still have it. And the pandemic was something like a catalyst, I have to say, for discovering new technologies or for understanding the need to act, to decarbonize without deindustrializing. And in this context, we were happy that hydrogen has been discovered or rediscovered. And that's the context of this manifesto. We are 1 year and some months after the European Union has adopted its hydrogen strategy. In the meanwhile, many member states in Europe, but also nations around the globe have followed. And we are now in the starting phase of implementation of this strategy. The European Union has presented also a legislative proposal, 12 legal proposals, 3,000 pages, and 1,000 mentionings of hydrogen. This legal proposal is called Fit for 55. And there you go. We want to become carbon neutral as of 2050, but we want to reduce until 2030, that's another 8 years, already by 55% CO2 emissions. That's super ambitious. And that is why the manifesto comes in a time where European industries, and we presented it in an industrial fair, if you wish, European industries, sustainable industries, need to understand who is the enabler of all this. Can we do it with power grids? Can we do it with electrons? Or do we need molecules? Hydrogen is a molecule, greenable molecule, and that's the reason why it comes absolutely in the right time, this manifesto.
All right, so that is the background of the manifesto. The manifesto itself, it's very concise. It's actually a one-pager with 12 very specific sentences. Out of these 12, what's the core really in it? What do you see as the central content and demand in the manifesto?
I think the core is climate mitigation is only possible and affordable with hydrogen. So hydrogen is not the silver bullet, but it makes all this affordable. And the second issue is hydrogen is there to replace. It can replace coal, it can replace oil, and it can replace gas. And that is what makes up the big request for paradigm shift. And a paradigm shift always needs to think big and big money. And that these are the most important points, I would say, out of the points mentioned here.
That's something you mentioned earlier as well. It's important to decarbonize without deindustrialize at the same time. So what are the industrial policy opportunities for Europe from the introduction of green hydrogen?
I mentioned already this replacement argument. So if you replace something, basically you are eager to continue basically to use the infrastructure or to use the installation, to use the people with the skills they have employed in these sectors, but to let them apply a non-emitting, a zero emission technology. And this is basically what we thrive for. We want not to invest only and to go into greenfield and to build up new factories in greenfield. No, we want brownfield, so existing capacities to be repurposed, retrofitted for the production and the use of hydrogen. And this is how we can decarbonize by using mainly no carbon hydrogen or renewable hydrogen, and by adapting the applications, the cars, the heating systems, the industries that are using hydrogen as a feedstock, by adapting this to the use of hydrogen. In many cases, this is possible with low investments. In some cases, it needs some initial investment, but then the follow-up investment will be contained and affordable and low. But this is a very complex system, and this is where we need to become ourselves creative and to start to think complex, but in a courageous way.
I think that's a great approach to repurpose existing infrastructure, also being able to use hydrogen in existing vehicles, for example, in existing combustion engines partly. Still, there's an investment, as you mentioned it, which makes it maybe less competitive to already existing solutions. When do you think when will hydrogen be competitive on the market? And most importantly, what role will policymakers play to getting it competitive?
Well, in some parts of the world, hydrogen can already be produced even renewably in a very competitive way. So let me mention Saudi Arabia, where you have a lot of sun and you have very cheap production costs for renewable electricity that then can be turned into hydrogen, and you would reach some 2 euro per kilo right now. I'm paying, just to give you an idea, I'm paying 10 euro at the moment for the kilo when I refuel my hydrogen car. I can go 100 kilometers, so 10 euro for 100 kilometers. That's where I am now. Just imagine that we could have 2 euro for 100 kilometers. So you see Saudi Arabia is already there, and Chile is at 1 euro. The Acatama Desert in Chile, 2,000 meters high, very perfect conditions to produce renewable electricity and thereof hydrogen. However, what we have is the transport issue. If we would have pipelines from Saudi Arabia ready to go for hydrogen, then the 2 euro plus some minor added costs would already be reality. We are not very far away from that, but we are close to that. So as of 25, you will see the first pipelines being really ready to go. Some of them short distances are already there in the Netherlands. The Netherlands will have in 27 a backbone for that. And we are working hard on retrofitting pipelines also intercontinental, like Africa and Europe, and then a European backbone to be ready latest 2030. So it's 8 years from now. It's quite soon. And we believe that hydrogen then will be absolutely, in a competitive sense, the replacement agent for oil and gas.
You mentioned it yourself. If we want to make hydrogen competitive in Europe, we need other regions in the world, such as Saudi Arabia, for example, or also big plants in Dubai, or maybe even as far away as South America. If we zero in on Europe, you already mentioned the Netherlands being there on the forefront. So which countries in Europe do you think have the greatest potential for a hydrogen economy and the whole value chain around it?
I don't exclude any country, because there are different forms of producing hydrogen. And I'll give you first the most sexy examples that everybody thinks of. That's renewable production. And there are 2 countries in Europe that have a lot of wind and a lot of solar. And it's small countries, but they could be at the forefront. That's Portugal and Greece. These 2 countries have a lot of both, but they don't have enough space. Spain is a country that has a lot of space. So it's not that densely populated as, for instance, Italy is or Germany is. And Spain will be another giant of hydrogen production as far as we see that right now. And then you have the countries that are super in mastering the complex system, like the Netherlands. Netherlands is absolutely the front runner when it comes to bringing different applications together. And yeah, they will also bring prices down by being front runners and by, at the moment, being the best in producing hydrogen pipelines. So Netherlands #1. This is also part of the cost scheme. But then let me come to other countries. Let me take Slovakia. Slovakia has no access to the sea. Slovakia has not these big mountains. Slovakia has not that much sun, but they have nuclear power. Do we like it? Don't we like it? It doesn't matter at the moment. At the moment, we need to accept that Slovakia would be in an ideal position to use natural gas that comes from Ukraine and to split it with nuclear power into hydrogen and into carbon solid. Because methane, so natural gas, is CH4. And if you split that with high temperature, you avoid to have a CO2 creation because C loves O. That's the perfect marriage for them. But if you do it with a pyrolysis technology, which is 5 times cheaper than electrolysis that you need for the production of renewable hydrogen, there you go. Then you have a very, very cheap production of clean, and I insist, clean hydrogen, if you deduct, of course, the nuclear aspect.
So that would make it a mix between pink and blue hydrogen.
That would make it a mix of pink and blue, and we call it turquoise. So pyrolysis hydrogen is turquoise color, and you easily can also take this high temperature from renewable. So you could do the same thing in Saudi Arabia. And why am I saying that? Because Saudi Arabia caused an earthquake by announcing that the biggest gas field that they have, it's a gas field with a value of $110 billion, that they dedicate this gas field as of now to the hydrogen production with pyrolysis or with another technology called ATR, which then would need that CO2 is stored. However, pyrolysis based on renewables would allow them to make it turquoise, fully turquoise, without nuclear. I think they don't even have nuclear. And that will deliver huge amounts of hydrogen already as of 24. Just announced by the Saudi Arabian government when they announced their climate plans to be net neutral in 2060, which is for the biggest polluter on the globe based on the sources, quite something.
Meaning like the biggest polluter if you look at the scope 3 pollutions.
Exactly. And that shows that hydrogen already in their calculation plays a role that is paramount. At the same time, it allows us Europeans, if we have the pipelines ready, to get this big volumes of clean hydrogen into our system. And there you go. The competitiveness of hydrogen will be given much earlier. It depends a little bit on the dedication of policymakers to go for that possibility.
When I hear that now, on the one hand, I see there is a lot of potential that could be realized in the very near-term future. However, there are very different approaches and stances on which kind of hydrogen we'd focus on. I guess if you look at, like from a German perspective, we probably strongly believe in it has to be powered by renewables and it has to be by, with seawater. Then you have the Slovakian way. Maybe France certainly want to focus on nuclear power. How much will the haggling on the various ways of producing hydrogen and also certifying hydrogen, measuring its output, will that be a roadblock that first have to figure out a joint approach, or can these work in parallel to each other?
They can and they will work in parallel. There's another thing that's biomethane, so that's biogas from biological waste. Not only, you could also take it from algae, and that's another big source that would allow us to even produce green CO2, because we will need CO2 that we avoid, of course, from fossil origin, but we will need CO2 not only in our beer, but also for other important processes that we need to take from somewhere. And here, this biogas and biomethane will play a very fundamental role. Without going into detail, we need to have, as you just mentioned, clear certification schemes. So who makes sure that the hydrogen I get here from Saudi Arabia is definitely clean and it's not gray, because gray hydrogen is emitting. Yeah? So the hydrogen that we use today, to be clear on that, we are fully aware of this, is gray hydrogen, where you have 1 kilo of hydrogen produced from natural gas, which produces 10 kilo of CO2. That's a very bad ratio. And we need to replace this gray hydrogen as well. However, if you have clear certification schemes, transparent and also traceable, then we will need these different kinds of hydrogen. We are at the moment preparing for a big legislative package in the EU. After the Fit for 55, which was presented in July, the next package is waiting. It was supposed to be the third gas package. It will be now called the Hydrogen and Decarbonized Gases Package. Wow. So hydrogen made it even to become the title of the next big gas legislation. And here we have the chance to be more precise about how these certification schemes in Europe, but also on a global scheme, should look like. And you can be sure we are working on that I would say night and day, because some of my collaborators are already dreaming this overnight and then wake up and come up with big ideas. So yeah, we are working on that.
We'll come back to the global scheme with the next question. But before I do that, we heard some of the technical potential. We heard which countries have certain special skills, let's say like that, like with the Netherlands, with the pipeline building, for example. How important are national roadmaps for the hydrogen industry? For example, Germany launched its own roadmap, I think, last year. So which countries are on the forefront there? And is it important to have your national plan as well?
Indeed, we have 13 countries that are extremely active in the European Union, having presented not only roadmaps, but also projects. We call them IPCEI, so I for important projects of common European interest. Indeed, we are working with all these member states together to bring these projects also to a union, to a big consortium, because at the moment, many of these projects are very nationally interesting and nationally important. But if they are not interrelated, well, you might then have hubs of hydrogen production and consumption, but you don't have an integrated system. That's exactly the job that we are doing. So yes, member states' roadmaps and countries' roadmaps are important. But to be honest, it's even more important to bring the different roadmaps together. And that's a job that my association, Hydrogen Europe, is at the moment doing. It's not easy, but it's the only way to accelerate things. We need to overcome the chicken and egg dilemma. You have people who produce hydrogen and have no client. You have people who produce buses or trucks that use hydrogen and have no deliverer. And we bring them together by combining the roadmaps and the projects.
So there's a big push in some countries in Europe already, and it's all also being coordinated on a European-wide level. Let's imagine we are successful in really finding a very economic way of doing the hydrogen turnaround. How would the economic opportunities for the European Union on a global scale look like?
Well, first of all, Europe will not be the perfect place to produce hydrogen because the production cost will be much higher than in Saudi Arabia or in Chile, as we already mentioned. I would also like to mention India with lots of wind potential also, and South Africa. However, Europe will be the place where this very complex system of change and of hydrogen application will be mastered first. So we will develop technologies that will make these interfaces between the different technologies cheaper, more efficient. And that's basically why Europe will become the hub number one in the world of hydrogen applications. And this is why we Europeans believe that we should be the spot market, because we will be one of the biggest user of hydrogen. Also producer. I mean, I don't underestimate the production of hydrogen. Just think about the buffering of the energy systems. So the electricity system that sometimes is full with renewable energy and needs a way out in order not to stop the wind turbines. We call that curtailment. This is possible by using hydrogen, especially one special technology, the PEM electrolysis, to within milliseconds to adapt and to produce hydrogen. So to buffer the system, this all will happen. However, Europe will be a place of more of consumption and of mastering the system. That's why we believe that the spot market should be in Europe, in Rotterdam. That's what we are promoting. And also the global price of hydrogen as a global commodity should be denominated in euro, not in yen, renminbi or dollar, but in euro.
That's quite interesting, because you seem to be very convinced that Europe is in a leading position there. So you're not worried about competition from China or Korea or Japan? Usually, if things were to go as in the solar industry, for example, China would just take over in the next years.
We are very concerned that we might not have learned the lessons from the past. However, what makes me smile is to think about the dedication of some of our politicians, especially on the European level. So if I think of Frans Timmermans, the European Commission Vice President, first Executive Vice President, that's his title. This is an outstanding politician who has called hydrogen the new rock star of the energy vectors or energy carriers. And I think he has a big support by Ursula von der Leyen his commission president. And we find also in many member states very, very committed people. Portugal, I mentioned already. Spain is starting. Macron, the French president, important because he is not only running for his office again, he's also the next EU presidency. He has announced a 30 billion euro package for energy, where hydrogen plays a very, very important part in not only nuclear, I can assure you, he also foresees a big, big part for renewable. So yes, I'm confident because the politicians have grasped that we cannot do it again as we did it with solar. And that is why I'm really confident that Europe will play this fundamental and also leading role in hydrogen production, application, and mastering.
Well, I always like to end on a positive note, and I think that's a perfect closing statement then, that we are in a good position. You said it yourself, 13 countries in Europe are really proactively leading the path into turning around the industry. And as you said, most importantly, not only decarbonize, but build an economic future out of it. We do not deindustrialize, but just repurpose existing infrastructure and build a new economic opportunity for Europe. One where it probably will have to face some competition around the world, but also will have a huge ecosystem, as you said it, because simply some of the production countries will probably be in other regions of the world. But that's the first I heard from you, that you're advocating for Europe becoming the spot market and specifically Rotterdam taking the lead there. So those were really interesting insights. Thanks for a behind-the-scenes look, also what's going on in Brussels and on a policy level, but most importantly, the perspective on behalf of Hydrogen Europe, meaning the industry perspective. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Jorgo.
Thank you, and always happy to continue that maybe in 1 year to see where we are. Thank you.
Check out the Green Hydrogen Manifesto as a free download online on the websites of the Smarter E Europe, the continent's largest platform for the energy industry. thesmartere.de/green-hydrogen-manifesto.